Pilate stood face to face with Jesus, bloody, silent, innocent. He could have stopped it all. His wife warned him through a terrifying dream. He even said, "I find no fault in him." But fear of losing power pushed him to make the worst decision of his life. What happened after the crucifixion? Rome turned against him. The crowds he tried to please vanished, and the man who once judged the Son of God became haunted by his choice. This is the story of how a Roman ruler, who once held the fate of Christ in his hands, lost everything: his rule, his peace, and eventually his life. The guilt was too much to bear. We want to take you back to a time when Rome ruled the world with an iron fist. In the distant province of Judea, one man held the power of life and death in his hands. His name, Pontius Pilate. Before his name became forever linked with the trial of Jesus, Pilate was just another Roman official trying to climb the ladder of power. He wasn't from Rome's highest circles, but he had enough wealth and education to be part of what Romans called the equestrian order. Not the top, but definitely not the bottom. Pilate came from an interesting family. His ancestors were actually Samnites, fierce warriors who had once fought against Rome. By Pilate's time, though, his family had fully embraced Roman ways. Some historians think Pilate got his position in Judea because of a powerful friend named Sejanus, who had Emperor Tiberius's ear. Either way, when Pilate arrived in Judea, he was determined to make his mark. But from day one, Pilate showed he didn't understand, or maybe didn't care about, the people he ruled. Imagine this. Pilate marched Roman soldiers into Jerusalem carrying standards with the emperor's image. That might not sound like a big deal to us, but for Jews, who believed in only one God and followed strict rules against images, this was deeply offensive. The reaction was swift. Crowds gathered in protest. Instead of backing down, Pilate threatened to kill them all. Only when the protesters showed they were willing to die rather than accept these images did Pilate finally remove them. "This man doesn't get it," the people must have whispered among themselves. But Pilate wasn't done making enemies. Later, Pilate decided to build a new water system for Jerusalem. Sounds helpful, right? But there was one big problem. He took money from the sacred temple treasury to pay for it. When angry crowds formed, Pilate sent soldiers dressed in regular clothes to mix with the protesters. At his signal, these hidden soldiers attacked the unarmed people with clubs, beating and killing many. Even the Roman historian Josephus wrote about Pilate's cruelty. Each clash made the people hate him more. Each mistake put his position in greater danger. Emperor Tiberius was watching. Just months before Jesus would stand trial, Pilate made another blunder by placing golden shields with the emperor's name in Herod's palace. The Jewish leaders were so upset they wrote directly to Emperor Tiberius, who forced Pilate to move the shields to Caesarea. That public correction embarrassed Pilate deeply. He was a man walking on thin ice with his emperor. He was a man who had repeatedly shown poor judgment. He was a man desperate to keep his position, willing to use violence when challenged. This was the man who would soon face the most important decision of his life. A man caught between keeping order and doing what's right. A man whose ambition was about to clash with the greatest moral choice in history. But the real test was still to come. When the guards brought in a prisoner named Jesus of Nazareth, Pilate had no idea this case would be different from all the others. No idea that this one judgment would echo through time, defining his legacy forever. Before we continue, think about this. Pilate repeatedly chose his position over doing what's right. What would you choose if you were in his place? His name is forever tied to this failure. The sun was just beginning to rise over Jerusalem when they brought Jesus to Pilate. It was Passover week, the busiest, most tense time in the city. Thousands of Jewish pilgrims filled Jerusalem's streets, celebrating their ancestors' freedom from slavery. Roman soldiers stood on high alert, watching for any sign of trouble. Pilate wasn't happy about being disturbed so early. As he stepped out to meet the Jewish leaders, he noticed something odd. They wouldn't enter his headquarters. They needed to stay ceremonially clean for Passover. So there he stood, Rome's representative, forced to come out to them. "What charges do you bring against this man?" Pilate asked, looking at the bound prisoner before him. Jesus stood silently. His face was already bruised from earlier beatings. He didn't look dangerous. He didn't look like a rebel. This confused Pilate. Why would the powerful Jewish council bring him such a harmless-looking prisoner? If he weren't a criminal, we wouldn't have handed him over to you, they snapped back. Pilate quickly realized what was happening. This wasn't about Roman law at all. This was a religious dispute they wanted him to solve. Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law, Pilate said, trying to push the problem back to them. But we don't have the right to execute anyone, they answered. And there it was. They wanted Jesus dead, and only Pilate could give that order. Stepping back inside, Pilate faced Jesus alone. "Are you the king of the Jews?" he asked. "Is that your own idea, or did others talk to you about me?" Jesus replied. This wasn't how prisoners usually spoke to Pilate. Where was the begging? The fear? Instead, Jesus spoke with a quiet confidence that unsettled him. As they talked, Pilate grew more puzzled. This wasn't a political revolutionary. When Jesus spoke of truth, Pilate famously asked, "What is truth?" A question that has echoed through centuries. Walking back outside, Pilate made his first declaration. "I find no basis for a charge against him." But the Jewish leaders wouldn't back down. They grew louder, adding new charges, claiming Jesus had stirred up the people from Galilee to Judea. Hearing Galilee mentioned gave Pilate an idea, a way out. Galilee was under Herod's authority. If Jesus was Galilean, maybe Herod could handle this mess. Pilate quickly sent Jesus to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem for the festival. His relief was short-lived. Herod sent Jesus back, and Pilate's problem returned, bigger than before. "Look," Pilate announced to the crowd that had gathered, "I have examined him in your presence and found no basis for your charges. Neither has Herod. He has done nothing to deserve death." That was the second time Pilate declared Jesus innocent. But the crowd was growing, becoming louder and more dangerous. Desperate now, Pilate tried another escape. It was customary during Passover to release one prisoner. "Do you want me to release the king of the Jews?" he asked, certain they would accept this compromise. Instead, urged on by the chief priests, the crowd shouted for a notorious prisoner named Barabbas, a real rebel who had committed murder during an uprising. "Release Barabbas!" they shouted. "Crucify Jesus!" Pilate was stunned. "Why? What crime has he committed?" he asked, making his third declaration of Jesus' innocence. But the reasonable voice of the Roman governor was drowned out by the roar of the crowd. "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate could feel control slipping away. The crowd was growing more hostile. The Jewish leaders were manipulating him, and despite all his power, he felt cornered. Then came the threat that struck fear into his heart. "If you let this man go, you're no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar." Those words changed everything. After his past mistakes, another complaint to Emperor Tiberius could end his career, or worse. Pilate knew he was being manipulated, but he couldn't see a way out. As the noise of the crowd grew to a deafening roar, Pilate found himself facing the greatest moral test of his life. 3 times he had declared Jesus innocent. Yet now, he would condemn him anyway. But there was something else troubling Pilate that morning, something that made this decision even harder. While he was sitting on the judge's seat, a message had arrived from his wife. A warning about a dream that would haunt them both for the rest of their lives. In the middle of the most important trial of Pilate's career, something extraordinary happened. While he sat on the judgment seat, a messenger pushed through the guards, urgency written across their face. The message wasn't from the emperor or a military captain. It was from Claudia Procula, Pilate's own wife. This was highly unusual. Roman trials were serious business, not to be interrupted by anyone, especially not a woman. In those days, women rarely involved themselves in political or legal matters, but something had pushed Claudia to break all these rules. Her message was brief, but chilling. "Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him in a dream today." Just a few years earlier, Claudia wouldn't even have been in Jerusalem. Roman governors typically served in provinces without their wives, a policy meant to keep them focused on their duties. But Emperor Tiberius had changed this rule, allowing wives to join their husbands. Now, Claudia's presence would forever change how this story unfolded. We want you to understand why her message hit Pilate so hard. In the Roman world, dreams weren't just random images during sleep. They were often seen as messages from the gods, warnings or omens about the future. When a Roman heard about a troubling dream, especially during a critical moment, they paid attention. What did Claudia see in her nightmare? The Bible doesn't tell us the details, but it must have been terrifying. Some early church writings suggest she saw disasters falling on Rome. Others say she witnessed her husband being judged by a higher power. Whatever appeared in her dreams, it was powerful enough to make her risk public embarrassment by interrupting a Roman trial. Imagine how Pilate felt, reading her message. His trusted wife, the one person who knew him best, was warning him about the very man standing before him. And not just warning him, she called Jesus righteous, innocent. How did she know? What had she seen? This wasn't just another pressure point for Pilate. It was deeply personal. While priests shouted outside and the crowd grew restless, his wife's words spoke directly to his conscience. The timing couldn't have been worse. Pilate was already struggling. He had declared Jesus innocent multiple times. He had tried sending Jesus to Herod. He had offered Barabbas instead. Nothing worked. And now, as his options were running out, came this unsettling message from home. Dreams appear throughout the Bible as God's way of communicating. Joseph had been warned in a dream to take baby Jesus to Egypt. The wise men had been directed by dreams. Now, a pagan woman, the wife of the man about to condemn Jesus, received what many believe was a divine warning. Pilate now stood at the crossroads of history, with warnings from every direction. His own judgment told him Jesus was innocent. The law demanded fair treatment. His wife's dream warned of terrible consequences. Yet the crowd kept shouting. What would win out? Justice or expediency? Courage or fear? The dream's warning or the crowd's demands? Despite the supernatural warning from his own household, Pilate was about to make a decision that would haunt not just his dreams, but his entire life. What happened next would seal his fate just as surely as it sealed the tomb of Jesus. Pilate stood on a balcony, watching the crowd grow louder and more dangerous by the minute. He had tried everything. He had declared Jesus innocent, not once, not twice, but 3 times. He had sent him to Herod. He had offered them Barabbas instead. His wife's warning about her terrifying dream still echoed in his mind. But nothing worked. The mob wanted blood. Then came the words that changed everything. If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar. Those words hit Pilate like a physical blow, not Caesar's friend. These weren't just angry words. This was a direct threat to everything he had worked for. Under Emperor Tiberius, being labeled not Caesar's friend could mean losing his position, his wealth, even his life. Tiberius was known to execute officials on the slightest suspicion of disloyalty. Pilate was already in trouble for past mistakes. Another complaint to Rome could end him. He looked at Jesus, beaten, silent, strangely dignified despite his wounds, and then back at the roaring crowd. In that moment, something broke inside Pontius Pilate. He called for a bowl of water. As the crowd watched, Pilate slowly dipped his hands into the cool liquid. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he announced, letting water drip from his fingers. "See to it yourselves." It was theater, really. A show for the crowd, a show for himself. As if water could wash away what he was about to do. As if words could change the truth. The crowd responded with a chilling shout that would echo through history. "His blood be on us and on our children." Pilate gave the order. Jesus would be crucified. We want you to picture Pilate later that day, standing high on the fortress wall. From there, he could see the procession to Golgotha, Jesus struggling under the weight of the cross, the soldiers, the weeping women, all because of his decision. What thoughts raced through Pilate's mind? Perhaps he told himself he had no choice. Perhaps he still felt the phantom sensation of water on his hands, trying to convince himself he wasn't responsible. Then came the moment every gospel writer recorded. Darkness fell over the land, in the middle of the day. For 3 hours, an unexplainable darkness covered Jerusalem. Even the sun seemed to hide its face from what was happening. When Jesus died, the earth itself shook. Matthew tells us there was a powerful earthquake. The huge curtain in the temple, the one separating the Holy of Holies from the rest of the sanctuary, tore from top to bottom. Even the Roman centurion who watched Jesus die exclaimed, "Truly, this was the Son of God." Did Pilate hear about these events? Did he connect them with his wife's dream? Did he begin to understand what he had done? Pilate thought his hand-washing would free him from guilt and responsibility. Instead, it changed his name forever, tied to the most infamous execution in history. Every time Christians recite the Apostles' Creed, they say, "Jesus suffered under Pontius Pilate." Water could not wash away what was now written in eternity. The man who tried to avoid taking responsibility became permanently responsible in the eyes of history. The judge who refused to judge rightly would now be judged by every generation to come. But Pilate's story wasn't over yet. In the coming months, new troubles would arise in Judea. His career would crumble. And the decision he made that fateful morning would follow him all the way to his tragic end. After the crucifixion, strange rumors began to spread through Jerusalem. The body of Jesus had disappeared from its tomb. Some claimed he had risen from the dead. Others said his disciples had stolen the body. For Pilate, these were just annoying stories that kept the city on edge. He tried to return to normal. There were taxes to collect, disputes to settle, reports to send to Rome. But something had changed. The man who once ruled Judea with an iron fist now seemed distracted, uncertain. Did the whispers of resurrection trouble him? Did memories of that trial haunt his sleep? We may never know what went on in Pilate's mind during those days. But we do know what happened next. About 3 years after Jesus' death, trouble broke out again, this time with the Samaritans. A religious leader had promised to show people sacred treasures supposedly hidden by Moses on Mount Gerizim. Crowds gathered, excited by the possibility. Pilate saw only another threat to Roman order. The old Pilate was back, the one who solved problems with violence. He sent in cavalry and heavy infantry. The soldiers surrounded the Samaritans and attacked without warning. Many were killed. Others were captured and executed. This time, Pilate had gone too far. The surviving Samaritans weren't like the Jews, who had no voice in Rome. They appealed directly to Lucius Vitellius, the Roman governor of Syria, Pilate's boss. Vitellius listened to their complaints: excessive cruelty, executions without trial. The same man who had tried to avoid executing one innocent man had now killed many. The irony couldn't have been more painful. The order came down. Pilate was to return to Rome immediately to answer for his actions after 10 years of ruling Judea. Pilate was stripped of his position and forced to sail back to Italy in disgrace. But Pilate's timing couldn't have been worse. While he was crossing the sea, Emperor Tiberius, the man who had appointed him, died. The new emperor was Caligula, known for his cruelty and unpredictable nature. Pilate had lost his protector at the worst possible moment. What happened to Pilate after this? History gives us different stories. The historian Eusebius writes that Pilate suffered such misfortunes under Emperor Caligula that he was forced to become his own murderer. Early Christian writings tell us Pilate was filled with regret. Some accounts say he was exiled to Gaul, modern France. Others say he committed suicide, unable to live with his guilt. One ancient text, the Mors Pilati, or Death of Pilate, tells how Pilate was sentenced to death by the emperor. Rather than face execution, he took a knife and ended his own life. His body was weighted with stones and thrown into the Tiber River. But even in death, the story says, Pilate brought troubles. The water became so disturbed by his presence that they moved his body to different locations, finally placing it in a remote mountain lake. Whether these stories are true or legends, they capture something important. The man who tried to wash his hands of responsibility for Jesus' death could never truly escape what he had done. Interestingly, not all traditions view Pilate so harshly. The Ethiopian and Coptic Orthodox churches actually venerate Pilate as a saint, believing he and his wife Claudia converted to Christianity. They celebrate his feast day on June 25th. What do these conflicting stories tell us? Perhaps that Pilate's life, like his famous decision, remains complicated. The man who asked, "What is truth?" left behind no clear truth about his own ending. But one thing is certain: the name of Pontius Pilate, the man who tried to avoid history, has instead been forever written into it. While empires have fallen and countless rulers have been forgotten, Pilate's name lives on. Every Sunday, in churches around the world, millions recite the words, "Crucified under Pontius Pilate." The man who wanted nothing more than to be forgotten by Rome became one of the most remembered figures in human history. The judge who refused to judge has been judged by history itself. But while we've focused on Pilate's story, there's a much more important question we haven't fully answered. What happened to the man he condemned? What did Jesus actually experience in those final hours? We've mentioned the crucifixion. But do you really understand what it meant to be crucified? Do you know what Jesus felt when they pressed that crown of thorns into his head? When the whip tore open his back? When those nails drove through his wrists? Most of us have heard about the crucifixion our whole lives, but few truly grasp how brutal it really was. The Romans designed crucifixion to be the worst possible death: slow, public, and more painful than you can imagine. Every breath Jesus took on that cross was agony. Every moment was torture. And he endured it all, when Pilate could have stopped it with a single word.